We're going to be talking sports, but in light of the events that happened last night, I've asked my good buddy Steve Daly here to come on. Hey, Steve. And
Hello.
Brock, hello. And Brock and Pep from the Unsportsmanlike Convo podcast to come on. And a little bit later today, Jim Reindel, who is a sports producer, is going to come on around 2:30. And we're just going to talk about this, see what people think. And I'm not going to go through my usual ads. I will say that Geek Vibes Nation is a partner now. I'm part of their network, Restream, and Ecamm Live. We have some links, but I'm not going to go into detail with ads. We're just going to start. And Steve is a director and a TD. He works at Fox Sports now, but he has worked at the inside the NBA with Shaq and Chuck, and he's got some stories about that. But let's just start with Steve because I want to hear what you think about last night. I don't know if you saw it, but Kenny walked off the set in solidarity with the players. We know that the Bucks didn't come out on the floor, and all three games were postponed last night. The players had a meeting. What do you think about that? What do you think about what's happened so far?
Um, I think it's and you guys can hear me okay.
Yeah.
I think what you're seeing is the NBA doing what it does best, and of all of the leagues out there, for players, the most outspoken to stand up for the rights of um, people who can't. They're doing it, And when you see I haven't worked on Inside the NBA in a long time, a year or so, but this is what these guys do. They make statements for the good, and there needs to be recognition. There needs to be more attention to this. And you think to yourself, how could there possibly be any more attention done, and than what was done before? And look what happened, and now even more attention needs to be drawn to it, and to the point where teams are foregoing playing a playoff game. It's astounding to me. I've been in this business for 20 years, and it's like a it's like a movie that you'd be watching. You're saying no way, but the guys, especially at Inside, they do this right. They do the things the right way. They tackle these social issues that you're seeing more. Sports shows. Max Kellerman came on today and had some words about SEC fans and things of that nature. Um, but there's a there's an attention that the NBA draws, and there's a reason why they're the best at social media. There's the reason why they have the most followers. There's the reason that LeBron James is who he is, and he draws the attention they are, and that's because they can stand up for change. And I think that what you're seeing now, although we all hear this unprecedented, but it's needed, not almost, it's needed.
Yeah.
It's needed to say here it is. This is what's happening. And if you don't see it or you disagree with it, you have to. It's hard for me because I grew up in a Democratic household, so it's hard for me to view the other side and try to get both sides of the argument. But when you see what the NBA has done, and they've done it right, they've led the way. They've led the way for kneeling. So baseball players did it. There were hockey players that did it, even though the reports said none of them knelt. Some of them knelt, and then of course Colin Kaepernick being the spearhead that no one paid attention to until now. Everybody's realizing how correct he was.
Right. And Brock and Pep, how do you guys feel about it? You are out in Ottawa, Canada. You have a different perspective. And I was even thinking about not doing this today because honestly, I'm white. But a lot of people I saw, including Chris Webber last night on the broadcast, said that everybody should be talking about this. And Doc Rivers, the coach for the Clippers, said, "Hey, listen, you shouldn't be outraged about this because you're black. You should be outraged about this because you're American." And so what do you guys feel about it out there? What's the mood out there? What are people talking about?
It's a little, I'd say, less of a focus. I find with our sports and news coverage, just ever so slightly in terms of the Canadian. Obviously, hockey is being kind of criticized right now for their lack of protest And you bring up a good point when it talks about, you talked about you being white and not maybe doing this, but I think that's all the more reason to do it, because if there is going to be change, which is what is needed, it needs to be by all different colors and supported by all different races, or it's not going to happen. I know, Pierre, you're a lot more into with the NBA, so understanding that the protests and where they're at, you have your own feelings on that.
Well, yeah, and to touch upon the point that he made about hockey, I mean, Tampa and Boston both released a statement this morning saying that they didn't get the news early enough to be able to even react to the situation. So they went ahead and played the game, not knowing all the facts behind what was going on in the NBA. So in terms of how I feel about it, or, in Canada, racism certainly exists. We've had, there's sadly many examples in our community. Any Facebook thread that you read that's news related, if you're going to have 1 out of 5 comments be something derogatory. So it exists here. We feel it. Mm-hmm. We feel what's going on in the NBA. I'm a huge basketball guy. I get goosebumps talking about it. I'm so proud of the NBA. I'm so proud of the players and the stand that they've taken. My question to them is, and the walkout is a statement. Like Steven said, it's a huge statement. It's unprecedented in a playoff game. To walk out of a playoff game and to possibly sacrifice a loss. Like, I don't know if Orlando just agreed to the fact that, okay, we're just going to cancel this game. But, I mean, Milwaukee could have taken a default loss in a playoff game. Unprecedented. Mm-hmm. The way I feel about it is, what's the next step? They've made the statement walking out, but what's level 2 in this? Like, is it canceling the whole playoffs? Is it canceling next year? I mean, we think back to, I can go all the way back to Germany, 1936. Jesse Owens, he races the race in the middle of probably the Nazi regime was at its strongest in 1936. He races the race, gets on the podium and puts his fist up. I mean, he just faced it head on rather than not race. And then, Bill Russell, throughout his whole career, he faced racism. Mm-hmm. He never walked away from it, and he fought. So I think what the players are saying now in their statement is that nothing has worked in the past. These guys are pioneers, fought for us, and nothing has changed. So the statement is, we're out of here. And good for them. And that's how I feel about it. And I think if we polled 1,000 Canadians, 900 of them would feel the same way.
Right.
999.
And so you guys heard this morning that they're going to play the playoffs, but they're probably canceling today. And everything's up in the air and it can always change. But they're saying right now that they're going to play the playoffs because there was a report last night saying that the Clippers and the Lakers had decided not to play the playoffs. And then Adrian, I don't know how to say his name, Wojnarowski, from ESPN said that wasn't true. And so it turned. But I think Doc Rivers was kind of the spark for this. He had a very emotional press conference where he was talking about, being scared for his kids getting pulled over by cops, and that something has to be done and nothing changes and something has to change. And I think that sort of inspired what happened with the players. I could be wrong, but what do you guys think about that? Did you see Doc talk?
Yeah, Doc Rivers is such a passionate person to begin with. To add, a movement behind him is all that much more. I think the thing that moves me always with this is, and you mentioned this at the beginning of the show, we're white, is I don't know what it would be like. I have a 5-year-old son, and I don't know what it would be like to have to explain to him when you get pulled. My dad never explained to me what had to happen if I got pulled over.
Right.
He never told me any of that stuff. That wasn't in our makeup. It wasn't in our mind to think like, well, no, if a police officer's there, everything should be okay. Or if you're doing something wrong, you're going to get put in the back of the squad car. That's how I grew up in central Pennsylvania.
Right.
That's what I assumed was going to happen. I have a lot of African-American friends who say, I don't know what to tell my kid.
Yeah.
That's what always, and to hear Doc say that, someone of power, someone of, in our minds, a person like Doc Rivers, the type of, person he is in our society, sports society, he's scared. I could not imagine what it would be like to be a regular Joe like myself and be terrified of what to tell my kid if he gets pulled over.
Yeah.
That's why those voices, that's why the NBA, they keep pounding that home. I mean, Chris Webber, I've got a chance to work with Chris Webber in the past, so his words were extremely important to me, because that is Chris Webber. What you saw last night, that's Chris Webber. For him to be like, get off your soapbox, that is Chris Webber.
Right.
And that's to see that representation across the league, from past players, coaches, and current players, to doing what they did, is such a statement. And Doc especially, because he's so outspoken and he's a great human being as well.
Right.
But it always brings back the words that he said about, what do I tell my kid? I think to myself, what would I tell my kid? I have no idea what I would tell my kid.
Right.
And because I'm white, technically I don't have to, right? It's not fair. That's what you have to go up against.
It's not fair and it's not right. Chris Webber kept saying, I watched the broadcast last night, he kept saying, if not now, when? And then actually Van Gundy, the coach, Stan Van Gundy, said the same thing. He echoed that. And, it's just, cities were burning, there were protests, they're everywhere, and still not much change. Some things did change, but not a lot. And then now we have this, and I feel like it's in the conversation now. I feel like everybody's talking about it. What do you guys feel like, Brock and Pep?
I think it's unfortunate that it's taken, like when we talk about this happened and now it's being talked about, these are people's lives that are either ending or changing severely. So it's really disappointing to hear that it takes more lives being lost and affected in order for us to even acknowledge it. But I think, what the players are doing, obviously Pep and I, I'm not speaking for him, but we support it. We understand that as much as we love sports and follow it and live for it, ultimately there are way bigger things out there than sports, and this is one of them. And I think it's a matter of everybody coming together to make that change. I know guys like LeBron James have been putting pressure on the ownerships to be more proactive, I guess, or supportive of it. And we know that the owners are white, but their players aren't. And this is it's a team environment. They should be doing it. These are the owners are guys that have a lot of power. The athletes have a lot of power, but the owners have just as much, if not more. So they need to really back their team, back their players, and get some change. Pep brings up a good point that now, we have the protests, we have some games that are boycotted. The playoffs are going to continue to go on, even though I think the understanding was that the Lakers and Clippers had both voted to not go with the playoffs, but everybody else had voted to continue. But what is the next step? So we can bring attention to it and say, okay, we've boycotted a couple of games, protest, delayed the playoffs, to sort of bring that to light. But what is the next step? What are we looking for in terms of a result in order to get back on the court? Is there something tangible where we're trying to get to a certain point in order to go back and play and feel that something has actually changed, as opposed to just delayed the playoffs by a couple of days? And I think that's where we're at now.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that's the point. You're absolutely right. In today's culture, especially with social media, things get stale. And I hate to say, like, the Black Lives Matter t-shirts, people are going to get used to it. So you have to do something else. You have to constantly go on top. You constantly have to bring more awareness. Like, I remember when George Floyd passed away, killed, and everybody was posting about it, and then everything started to die down, and you'd look at your social media feeds and people are putting posts of their kids and their puppies again. You're like, man, someone knelt on another man's neck until he died.
Right.
And I'm posting about my dog. What's the next step? So you sign a petition, you call the attorney general, you try to get on their radar, you do whatever you can to make the people who are going to give results uncomfortable enough to do something. The NBA just did the most big to move people to do something. You're completely correct. Now what? That's
Right.
great. Now everybody's like, great, NBA, awesome. Now what? And it's not on the NBA, although they're taking it. It's on everybody else. Now what? Now we have to go farther. How do we go farther and do more?
Well, the one thing that I will mention that you guys know, but I'll just mention for the audience, is that the Major League Baseball canceled their games, and not all of them, but several games. Major League Soccer, Atlanta United, and the game they were playing, and then the WNBA canceled their games, and so people are talking about, is the NFL going to do it? And there was a guy from the NFL's front office who's an ex-player, and he went on ESPN this morning and he was crying. And he was literally crying. He was on with Keyshawn Johnson and Jay Will, and he was saying, I'm scared. And that's what LeBron said, that he was frightened because, you have this privilege when you're a player, but as soon as you get in your car and go drive away, you don't know what's going to happen. So, yeah, it's a very, very difficult situation. But all the players, a lot of celebrities, a lot of players are supporting the players, like all four of us do. What is next? And I hate to say it, but I personally think what's next would be the big thing that would really start everybody talking about it would be to cancel the playoffs. And some people think that, hey, maybe canceling the playoffs will lose our voice, or we can use that money to give money to organizations that are going to fight injustice, or whatever their reason for it. But if the basketball league, the NBA, and all these leagues canceled everything that was already canceled because of COVID, I think that would make a huge statement. What do you guys think? Brock and Pep?
Well, yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm sure that's still on the table. I don't think anything's off the table. I mean,
Okay.
In fact, as we're talking, the Boston Red Sox are strongly considering, and it just came up on my feed, canceling their game tonight against the Blue Jays. And both teams obviously would have to agree. Otherwise, there's going to be some sort of default. So the wheels are in motion for things like that to happen. And these leagues have put in a ton of money to try and get sports back on television. They've invested in these bubble cities and all that, and to remove all that would be a huge statement. Right or wrong, I'm not smart enough to decide whether that's correct or incorrect. All I know is I support the cause. So if collectively they say this is what we have to do, then I'm right behind them.
Yeah, I mean, I echo that we support, but then as we're having this conversation, I feel like we're not doing nearly enough as it is, understanding and being affected by games being postponed and canceled. If it's just an inconvenience for us in terms of, well, we have nothing to watch tonight, nothing to talk about, I think we're missing the point, and I think that's sort of from a whole standpoint of why they're doing it. I think it does, we like Steven said, it kind of has to sort of keep the ball rolling, because it gets stale, and you say, okay, after 3 or 4 days of postponed NBA stuff, they're back to the NBA. I think it goes under the rug after about 2 weeks. People forget about it, and now they're focused on the championship. And I think that ultimately, for things to change, it's going to take something really big, where there is no sports until there's actual change. And that, now there's a lot of pressure on the owners that they're just losing money because there's no sports, there's no fans are losing out, they miss the sports, and it's a consistent thing. It's not just a temporary fix. It's not just okay, I got to live without basketball playoffs for 3 days. I can get through that. It's when you start thinking of what actually has to happen for real change to be made, I think it ends up being a very significant act that's going to do that.
And when you think about vocations where you can ill afford to have bad apples, things that come to mind are teaching, medicine, the presidency, and policing. You can't afford to have bad apples. Oh, there's bad apples in every industry. Yeah, that's nice, but you can't afford to have that in policing, and that's what we're seeing, I think, from this side of the border, this is what we see. Do we have our own issues here in Ottawa and around our country? Yeah, probably. I'm sure there are some police officers who really shouldn't be policing anything, but that's where the root is. That's where the cause is. That's what we need to address. What are these police officers trying to prove by beating up or shooting somebody in the back 7 times when they're trained to take these people down without using force, that level of force, a gun. Where was his taser? Did he tase? Okay, the taser didn't work. Surely you can apprehend the guy. You're 3 cops right behind him. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to take a guy's life in front of his kids and his wife. And that's what we see, and that's what needs to be addressed. And to make excuses for anything else is you're just missing the point. That's the cause. That's why everyone's doing what they're doing right now.
Yeah, I agree. And I would just say a couple of things. My dad was a cop. I know he shot his gun a couple times, but he never killed anybody. I just went to a funeral for a policeman that was my girlfriend's brother-in-law, and there were hundreds of cops at the funeral, and all great people. But the bad apples have to be, or whatever you want to call them, they have to be accounted for. It has to be accountability, and that's the problem. The problem is that people are on administrative leave and nothing's really happening. And I know there's a justice system and all that, but yeah, something has to change. And I think the thing about this, and Steve, you tell me what you think right after I mention this, but I think money changes things, because you can protest in the street for 10 years and nothing happens. Some things happen. Martin Luther King happened. A lot of things happened from that peaceful protest, but money talks. And if you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars with the NBA and baseball, you're talking about billions of dollars with the NFL. And I just feel like that's a huge ship that if you shut that thing down, people are definitely going to notice. So you put them all together, yes. And Clayton Kershaw, the pitcher for the Dodgers, I just want to put up what he said. He said, as a white player on this team, how can we show support? What's something tangible that we can do to help our black brothers on this team? And we felt the best thing to do was to support that and not playing. And I think that's the only thing you can do. We can come on this broadcast, they can not play with their black brothers, and that's all you can do until someone in legislature or the government or the Congress does something, because it's got to stop. So
the perfect example of money is the fact they're trying to have college football. Players who don't get paid, and they're trying to still push college football amongst the pandemic. I grew up not a college sports fan. I was a pro sports fan growing up where I grew up, which is weird because I lived like an hour and a half from Penn State. But if that's not evident enough, obviously, like I'm covering a lot of Braves with Fox Sports right now, and there was lots of conversation, speculative mostly, about it's the owners who aren't letting this happen. The players are being selfish about the whole pandemic and starting. Everything is about money. When you bring it to this issue, it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. It should just be like it's a perfect example of bad apples in jobs that shouldn't have bad apples. But it is a lot about money. It's about revenue, because in our business especially, we all know people who are freelance, and we know that when the pandemic happened and sports stopped, these people went on unemployment. It wasn't like a lot of people got hurt bad, and then when it started, it's starting very small, so still half the people aren't working. So I'm not trying to build into a pandemic thing, but when you see a movement like this, it shouldn't be about money. It should be about what you're saying, Shawn. It should be about legislature and getting the right pieces in the right places. And yes, our system does not move as quickly as we want to see justice, without a doubt, if that is not evident enough. A police officer putting on administrative leave doesn't mean he's not going to be convicted, doesn't mean he's not going to be. But when the evidence is there that a man gets shot in the back 7 times when they're trying to apprehend him, and a 17-year-old with an AR-15 gets offered water, and then gets to go home before he's apprehended. It's just 2 very different spectrums and 2 very different skin colors.
Yeah.
I think just to follow up with the money issue, it's not that money is going to affect change, but if it is affecting the powerful people, their bottom dollar, that's motivation enough to then hopefully push legislature through or use their influence for those kind of things.
Yeah.
Pep, do you have anything to say? Because I'm about to bring Jim Reindel, the sports producer, on. Is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I just think that, if at this point, whatever it takes really to get something moving forward. On this side of the border, it's very different. Our perspective might be different. We get all our information from the media, so we're not living it like you guys are. I don't know. I just feel like whether it's a governor of a state or whether it's the president or the vice president or so, I just feel like somebody needs to stand up and say, everybody calm down. We're all in the same boat. We're all fighting for the same things. But there's such a divisive vibe that we get here in Canada based on what we see in the media from the United States and their leadership. And I'm not making this political. I'm neither Republican or Democrat. I don't know enough about anything when it comes to that stuff. But what we see is a lack of leadership from state to federal government, and that's what we see, and that's what we're witnessing. And I've yet to see somebody stand up from the current regime and say, everybody, we're all in this together.
Right. Okay. Let me bring Jim on because he's been patiently waiting, and we'll add him to the conversation. Let's see here if this works. I worked with him at Turner. He is a sports producer. We worked at the NBA space. Let's see here. Let's see if he's going to come on here. Hello. Oh, hello.
Hey guys.
Hey Jim.
How you doing?
Oh, hold on. I don't see you here, man. I've never. I hear you.
Oh,
there you are. There you are. Okay. Yep. I knew that was going to happen. We're 4-screen now. This is Jim Reindel. He's a sports producer. He worked at Turner with me at NBA. How's it going, Jim?
Good. How you guys doing?
Good, man. We're talking about some serious stuff here. You just came right in the middle of the conversation, and we're talking about legislature and Congress and people doing things because nothing's really happening, and that's why these players have started a boycott. But I just wanted to ask a question that maybe Jim can answer, or any of you guys. Did anybody see the press conference? I don't know what else to call it, of the mother of Jacob Blake. She called for unity. She called for no hatred. And she said we're all human beings and we should all take care of each other. And the only supreme being is God, and that we should all always take care of each other. And she doesn't want the riots. She doesn't want the violent protests. And she just wants peace. And she said that's what Jacob would want. Did anybody see that, or how do you feel about that? Jim, you can go first if you want.
I didn't see that. I also heard something else she said where she's like, this isn't my son. This does not embody what my son is.
Yes.
Or was about.
Yes.
I think it's pretty poignant. I don't think so. Did George Floyd mother said the same, or his family said the same.
Yeah.
I think people are, hijacking it for their own purposes, and there's a lot of different purposes going on.
Right.
Or reasons.
So,
have we heard from Jacob Blake? Is he able to communicate? I know he's still. I'm sure he's still critical at this point, but has he been able to communicate, or has he said anything? Have they interviewed anybody where there's a quote from him?
I haven't heard anything. Everything I've heard has been from the mom and the sister. But we were talking about earlier, Jim, about how LeBron James says it's frightening to be black in America. That you have certain privilege as an NBA player, but then when you get in your car, or he's worried about his sons. We talked about some NFL players talking about worried about their sons. Steve earlier talked about he doesn't know what that's like. I obviously don't know what that's like to have a conversation with your kids about driving in the car. But Brock and Pep, I don't hear anything about any kind of police violence or any kind of violence in Canada. Does that just not happen there, or do we just not hear about it?
You guys just don't. I mean, you don't get. Nobody in the States is streaming or trying to get mainstream Canadian news. We're sort of a one-way pipeline for information. We gravitate and want all of the American TV productions, news productions, those channels. We have all those up here because we want the college football, we want the NBA, NFL, we want all the sitcoms that are produced down there. You guys aren't getting the CBC shows and channels down there, so you're not getting that news. It does happen up here. It is not. I don't think it's to the degree that it is in the States. But again, I'm speaking from just what we've seen. But Pep's talked about bad apples and stuff, and bad situations and bad circumstances, bad reactions, and we have that up here. There are issues with police that, it just is what it is, but it's not quite the scale and with the racial undertones as it is down there.
And we have, our big city vibes here in Canada. We talk about Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa's getting bigger anyways. British Columbia, Alberta, the province of Alberta, their police forces are very diverse. A lot of visible minorities. So maybe they have a better understanding when they're dealing with certain situations. I don't know, but we don't have it to the like Brock said, to the degree that we see on television, certainly. But your population's 8 times ours or 10 times or whatever it is, so you're going to have more examples of unfortunate situations in the United States than you'll see in Canada, just based on population alone. But no, we typically don't have as much here.
You bring up a good point. Like our police forces, at one point I was going to be a police officer. I thought about it. I was recruited for it after I was done playing football. And I remember at the time, and it still is, where there is a big influence of having racially diverse police forces. So there's a big push to make sure that they were hiring minorities and people with different backgrounds. And I think it's for that purpose. It's to understand and treat everybody sort of the same as much as they can. If you have a partner, one's white and one is black, or one is Lebanese or whatever, right? And you see, we're in that situation. There is an understanding there that one officer might have that the other one doesn't, and they can kind of work together. But the diversity is definitely a strong suit from our police forces.
And we had a high-profile case 2 years ago. A police officer, very similar, eerily similar to the George Floyd situation, where he manhandled an African American, and that person died. And that person ended up, after he did some research and background, he was off his meds. He had some mental health issues. So the officer was clearly not trained enough to handle this individual, or certainly talk him down, or whatever the case is. So we've had our share of incidents, but no, definitely not to the degree that you guys see there.
Right. And Jim, if we can go to you first, and then Steve, what do you think is next? Like, what are you seeing? What are you hearing from your friends and family? And what are you seeing in the media that tells you that what's going to happen next? I know that we're probably not going to have games today, but do you think the playoffs will be canceled? What do you think of the next steps? I know that the Milwaukee Bucks, some of the players had talked to people in the Wisconsin legislature, and possibly the mayor also, or the governor. So there's communication there, but what do you think will happen next with not only the NBA, but the MLB, MLS, hockey, NHL, football? Jim first, then Steve.
Well, that's a loaded question. Well, I mean, per our ex-colleague, Shawn, Charles Barkley has said it, and he's echoed it, that we're all disappointed in the various stuff that's happened, but when people look to sports to get away from all that, and you got to be very, very careful going forward, especially these young guys that have all this money. It's not like it's not like they're Kareem Abdul-Jabbar or Bill Russell. I'd like to hear from Bill Russell, a guy who went through it in the 60s and really went through a lot of stuff in Boston where he could kind of speak to this stuff. A lot of these players, we're all upset about what's been happening, but it hasn't happened personally. Well, I'm sure we all have our personal stories, but like an icon like Bill Russell, who really went through, Boston being a racially charged time in the 60s, and it still is. I'd like to hear from those. But to answer some of your wider questions, I think at least the feeling I've talked to a couple people is we're really looking for the NFL to have games to kind of, say baseball is America's pastime, but football is America's passion, kind of like the modern gladiators. Mm-hmm. And people are chomping at the bit. A lot of people are upset in the Midwest about the Big Ten canceling, but this past week they've kind of talked about it, like where they pumped the brakes on a little bit. As a lot of parents of athletes got involved and said, hey, can we rethink this and look at it? Like here in Atlanta, they're not going to have fans for the first 2 home games for the Falcons. And my hope is, and I think a lot of people is like, we want to have football. Hockey. I mean, hockey's a great break from basketball, with their 2 bubbles. And speaking of the CBC, I grew up in Michigan, and Saturdays was a huge day before cable. I'm kind of old because we had the CBC all day, hockey night in Canada. So that was a big sports day for us. So,
but Jim, sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to tell you, because you missed this point that we had before, that and this is a hypothetical, but if all of the sports shut down their seasons, including the NFL, which is this huge ship worth billions and billions of dollars, that's going to make a huge statement, and it's going to get everyone in the country and the world talking about what these players want them to talk about, which is changing injustices and focusing on that. So how do you feel about that? Like, I guess a hypothetical, if everything shuts down, or if you may feel like some of the players feel, or some of the owners feel that, let's keep playing, and then we can donate money, or we can have press conferences, or we can talk about these things, but still keep playing.
Yeah, I think you really need to keep playing, and shutting it down is just going to turn off a lot of fans, and you might not get any of those fans back. And when you got, the 50-yard line, the center court seats here at State Farm Arena, a lot of those are corporate seats. Some isn't the regular fan. The regular fans are, elsewhere in the stadium.
Right.
And if you don't continue to put the lights on, you might lose a lot of people. And then where do you go? Like MLB handled the COVID very poorly. They went into like labor strike about it. I think the NFL has been more of a slow burn, but I really think it's imperative that they keep the games going for TV contracts, for keeping the everyday fan.
But then, Jim, do we go back to what we were talking about earlier, that everybody's just back on Facebook posting pictures of their kids and their puppies? You know what I mean? Like the whole reason for this, and the whole reason for the players' courage, and the reason for them doing this, is to say, hey, enough is enough. We're just done unless something gets done. Let me let Steve answer that, since you've been talking for a minute. Steve?
No, I think there's a large ripple effect with the stoppage of sports. It's a lot bigger than people who aren't sports fans don't fully understand it. I have family members who probably have only watched my high school football games, and that was it. And there's a very large ripple effect, not only with contracts, not only with people's salaries and player salaries, but people like us who are on this level where we may not be working. But the important part of it is where we go from here. I think the NBA athletes showed us, okay, this is what we're willing to do. And it also, if it were me and I was an owner, I would be if I was an owner, I'd be worried that they might do it again or go worse. So then maybe they're trying to get the owner on their side now. So now if the owners, much to what Brock was saying, if the owners are on their side because they're not going to lose any on the thing on the bottom line, or they don't want to lose more on the bottom line, then maybe these more powerful, wealthy people will start pushing the more powerful, wealthy people in Washington, D.C. to make change, which I think is the whole root of the movement. So where do we go from here? You know, obviously, if NFL did something, it would be a huge blow to the sports scene. It would be enormous. I personally, I'm more of a baseball, hockey, basketball fan over football anyway. But you know, that would be an enormous blow, not only for contracts, not only for players' salaries and TV rights and people who work the broadcast and everything, but fans as well. And I think what the whole point of what the NBA did was just to say, this is what we can do here. We need to go here, and we don't want to go here, but we will. And I think that's, I mean, if that's where they have to go, that's what they have to do.
Right. And let me ask Brock and Pep this question. You both can answer it, or one of you. So hypothetically, let's say Friday they start playing again. Okay. I don't see much change happening. Maybe, hopefully, some change happens, but it's just like, it's an event. Something happened and it was unprecedented and historical and courageous. But if they all shut down, if all the sports shut down, will it matter, Brock and Pep? Do you think something will happen, change will happen? Or do you think that might just be something that happens and still nothing significant happens?
You know, I think the real issue right now is that everybody's talking about something has to happen, but nobody knows what that specifically is. And because we don't know that, there is no real tangible result that can happen realistically within a couple of years. It's just not going to happen. They can change legislations. They can change and create more training for the cops if that's part of it. Whatever it may be, but it's a national and worldwide, I guess, mindset, because I'm including Canada stuff in there. It's a mindset on how we treat people of different races. And I think that is just, it's not something that money can buy. It's not something that a legislation will change. So ultimately, the end result that we want is something that's going to take many years. So, you know, I think it is, it's the next step, let's say, of a wake-up call for, again, the people in power and, fans that are watching, to sort of shed light on it. But ultimately, I'm not sure if it's, that alone is not going to solve the issue.
Right. But let me just cut in here, Pep, before we go to you.
Sure.
So I'm just a guy. I got 3 kids. I think everybody's equal. I think everybody is the same, and I love everybody. Okay. But my solution would be, if I was the president or in some kind of power, would be that you make police forces the majority of people in police forces on the ground minorities. Okay. So that would be something that would be going towards change. And you would say, okay, we're going to take all different kinds of people and we're going to make the police force diverse. And I know there are some minorities on the police force, but I don't know what the numbers are, but we're going to make it 50%. We're not going to make it 5% or 10%. And, I think that would help. And then also I would think, when there's situations that are night and day and clear, like this thing happened with Jacob Blake, people have to be accountable. And I think those two things where, it makes sense. It's like, okay, this happened. We have it on video. It shouldn't have happened. This guy's got to go to jail. You know what I mean? So if those two things happen, I think we'd be going towards a place. It is not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in a year. It might take 5 or 10 years. But that's just my 2 cents. Pep, what do you think?
Well, I think we have to start somewhere. So if starting somewhere means canceling sports to make sure the message gets out, then I'm all for it. The trickle down effect, or some of the collateral damage will be things like what Stephen mentioned. We'll lose the team like the Expos. Like the Expos, when there was a work stoppage back in '94, when the Expos were playing really well, when that work stoppage happened, the Expos never recovered their fans. I'm apples and oranges here. Like it's not even the same conversation. But that's when we talk about collateral damage for sports walking out. And I think we need to avoid that. We'll lose franchises, and then ultimately we'll lose fans. But I think when you talk about your idea of having majority of minorities on policing. Well, you're always gonna have it's the best person for the job, and that's how it should be, and you're gonna have that group come up. On top of that, are these minorities properly trained as well to not be biased against white people? So you're gonna have that group as well. So I think it starts in school. It starts early education at an early age, about inclusiveness and diversity, and you get that message at a young age, and you hope that the parents are on board with that message. That's where it has to be. I don't remember in elementary school or high school ever sitting down and talking about inclusiveness and diversity. I don't know. And I'm 43 years old. I don't recall that segment in my high school or my elementary school days. So it needs to be something discussed, just like sexual education. It has to be part of the curriculum.
Bring it
now.
into the schools, yeah.
And on the other side, I think like home economics. Well, Shawn, to your point, I mean, the Atlanta police force is like the majority. It's like 80% black or minority. I mean, so there's always going to be issues and training and all that stuff. And then it's just not about. Well, I just don't want to say it's just not all about color, because that's the main point we're talking about. But, when you have a police force that's 80% black, and then you have an event happen in Atlanta, and then immediately our police chief loses her job because of an event that happened because of the protest. And was that fair? She was black, and she was arguably one of the best police in America. So it's tough. But in terms of diversity and learning and growing, I mean, I was listening to Adam Carolla's podcast, so I got to give him credit for this. He might have been talking to some MMA fighter, but how to interact with police too, as children, as citizens. Never, when police tell you to do something, hey, just unplug, or I've never really done that, because there's a fear too when I get pulled over, like, oh, what's going on? Is it tag? And actually, it happened when I moved to Atlanta. So how does the citizen interact with the police? Like, I've never had anyone tell me how to interact with the cops during driver ed. So it's a holistic approach.
Steve?
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea of you hear the words defund the police, and I know that there's a left view of this politically and a right view of it, and it really is more of like reorganization of funds. To much to what kind of like what Pep was saying, starting at the high school, collegiate or grade school, high school level, but also more where you're, instead of investing in, I know this sounds very, I don't want to say I know it sounds very leftish and liberal, but instead of worrying about having more firepower, more education in, if someone is mentally unstable, the beat cop isn't called in, but someone who's trained to deal with a mentally unstable person is called in. And if, and that may not, and it shouldn't be a race thing. Number one, it should never be a race thing. It should be what's the level of the crime? How do we apprehend? Because you should apprehend, because you also shouldn't kill guilty people either. So, when you look at that as how to restructure, it's everywhere. It's going to start in grade school. It's going to go through high school. You're right, Jim. At driver's ed, they should have a little chat about how to act when a police officer pulls you over. And they should talk to you about systemic racism in school, because it happens and it's happening. And then from there, where do you go? College. And maybe how do you deal with the different situations? There's 150,000 different situations, and someone would get arrested for, or a police officer would be called for, and maybe, I don't know, I'm just guessing, maybe 40% or 60% would need a specialist instead of a police officer. That's I'm just throwing a number out there. How many times does that happen? A domestic dispute, and you've got a guy who's a police officer showing up. Should that happen, or should it be more of a trained therapist type of officer. There's all kinds of ways to look at that, how it should be built. And it's a bigger picture. What the NBA is doing is saying, this is how bad it's gotten. Look how bad it's gotten. And now people are saying, whoa, they walked out on playoff games? This is how bad it's gotten. That, however you want to look at it. I know there are some people that were like, well, it's easy for these guys for how much money they make to walk out. It's not. It's not.
No, it's not.
It's not easy for them to do this. It's not. For all of us who know athletes, it's not easy for them to do this. They have to get pushed to a point to do this. And that's why the change that they're talking about, to everybody's point right now, has to start from grade school all the way up to how states and local governments and cities and counties make their laws and how they're reacting to things.
But I'll ask all of you guys, and whoever wants to chime in can, is there anything we can do right now? And I'll just mention one thing that you can talk about after that if you want. I heard from, I think it was a reporter on NBA TV, where some of the players just didn't want to play. You know what I mean? It wasn't about protest. It wasn't about boycott. It was like, I'm feeling so bad right now that I can't give 100%. That I don't know if they were depressed or just, sunken down to just so angry that they couldn't even play. So I think that's what helped it too. But this will be our last thing that we'll talk about, guys, because it's towards the end of the hour. Each of you can go, and I'll say, Steve, Jim, Brock, and Pep, is there anything we can do right now? Have you heard about anything? Have you thought of anything? So Steve, Jim, Brock, and Pep. Steve.
Honest to goodness, it's having conversations like this. We also need to, I need to have a conversation with my black friends,
Yeah.
And I need to ask them, because it's not, there's in no way, shape, or form am I saying I need to be told what to do in this situation. It's to have a conversation. It's to tell them that, listen, I'm here for you. I'm here right beside you. Whatever I can do, because it is just frustrating. Because I think of that movie, A Time to Kill, with McConaughey, and he gives that great in the court, and he describes all this awful stuff that happened to this little black girl, and then he says, imagine she's white. Let's do that for a minute. Imagine everything happens like this way, but the races were reversed.
Right.
Yeah.
That would send. You think it's bad now? What if the races were reversed? It's and that just goes to show you what, the type of thing that needs to happen, that needs to change, is that it should. I always just tell my kids it doesn't matter what race the person is, because my daughter always just says, "Are they black or white?" I'm like, it doesn't matter. It does. It does. It's time to understand that it does matter, and there's to focus on, to understand that what has been against the black community and people of other races of what it needs to change. What we can do right now is continue to have a conversation with somebody who may not care, and get them to understand why they should care.
Right.
You're not going to combat somebody who's going to show up with a gun and try to protect people by shooting protesters. That's not the person you talk to. You talk to somebody who I really don't care. Make them care.
Yeah.
Make them care.
Jim, thanks, Steve.
It's good points. It's funny, living in downtown Atlanta, what city is 65 to 70% black. What I've noticed, and what I would say to an answer, is that be more compassionate and patient. Like, what I've known is when I see black neighbors or people going to the store, it's just it's been a little more pause and saying hello, or maybe even not saying hello, but I've just seen a little slowdown of interaction, which more patience I've actually seen. So that gives me hope, and funny enough, I was in this COVID thing looking for something to work out, and I went to this hot yoga thing or class. And after class, I noticed Joe Johnson was in the class, and this was right before the bubble, and he's like the hired gun all season. And the Pistons were going to, I'm from Detroit. They were going to sign him earlier in the season. I was like, there's rumors he might go to A, B, and C team. I was like, hey, you going to go? And to your point, Shawn, he's just like, I don't know. That's a lot of time. I got sons, and, I don't want to be away from my kids. And if you go to the playoffs, if you go to the finals, it's going to be, 2 months. So, I understand people not wanting to be away from their family for that long. And it reminded me of something Adrian Dantley said. He's like, to be successful in the NBA, you got to be comfortable with having 4 walls around you and just stay in your hotel room. So I thought about with the bubble as well.
Thanks, Jim. Brock and Pep?
I'll reiterate what Steve was saying. I think that's bang on. It's the conversations that we're having, and you talk about, if the NFL boycotted and they took a year off, all the sports were gone. If nothing else, that would spark a lot of conversations, and it could be as young as preschool kids that are saying, "Oh, there's no hockey," and that sparks a conversation they have with either their parent or other kids, and then their teacher, and then that's where things get passed. But I think that's actually the biggest thing we can do right now is have those conversations with people, and I think Steve's bang on.
Pep?
Yeah, and I would, again, I echo those sentiments. We explained to our kids what COVID was. My nephew knows more about COVID than I do. And if I have the same conversation with my nephew and kids about what's going on now and educate them, they will learn and they will actually research. Kids are sponges. They'll want to find out what's going on, what's happening, why are we fighting each other? It's the person who doesn't care that we need to worry about and we need to have conversations with. The adult who doesn't care, who doesn't see a problem. I think that's the group of people that we need to sit down and say or convince that there is a problem, and we need everybody on board moving in the same direction, and that direction is essentially peace. And I can't believe we're talking about peace in 2020. It seems like we move forward 10 years and we fall back 20 years, and it doesn't make any sense. But I think we all need to be on the same page, moving in the same direction, and that direction is just peace. And because we are the leaders of the free world, essentially, I know America is anyway. So Let's be the example.
Great.
I think that's great, Pep. That's a great way to end it. Thank you guys for being here today. Thank you for putting in your 2 cents about this issue, and I am up for having this conversation again with all kinds of people. Anybody who wants to do this again, just message me and we'll talk about it again. But thanks for doing this, guys, and hopefully we will be watching and see what happens and continue to have conversations with people that we agree with and don't agree with.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome, guys. Thanks so much. You have a great day. Take care. Thank you.
Take care.
All right.